In a recent blog post from the Entity Framework team, Rowan Miller, who's the program manager, explicitly stated their vision for Entity Framework 7. They want it to be a core framework that handles concepts common to most data stores with provider-specific extensions that become available when you target a specific provider. What he's talking about here is letting Entity Framework not just work with relational data, but work with other types of data stores as well. I'll talk more about that throughout this module. Here's the marketing phrase that Microsoft has been using to express this and the other important goal for Entity Framework. They want to be able to target new devices, such as phones and tablets that aren't dependent on the full .NET framework, and new data stores, as I just mentioned. Let's see what this means. To do that, let's take a quick trip through Entity Framework's history. We started with EF1 that came to us in .NET 3.5 and Visual Studio 2008 Service Pack 1. It was part of the .NET framework, and using a designer, it let us work with existing relational databases. All of the code generated from the Entity Framework model was loaded down with references and objects from the Entity Framework API. The next version of EF was called EF4 and was part of .NET 4. This version added logic that allowed Entity Framework to work with our model classes without them being loaded down with EF APIs. These types of classes are referred to as POCOs, or plain old CLR objects. At the same time, it was also totally backward compatible, thereby supporting two means of using Entity Framework, the original way, but also the new way that supported more agile programming methods. And in Visual Studio, the designer was enhanced to let us design our models from scratch and create a database based on that design. Rather than waiting for another version of .NET to enhance Entity Framework, the team then provided two new important capabilities by way of NuGet packages, which sat on top of the core of Entity Framework that was in .NET 4. The first new feature was support for what was called the code-first modeling workflow. No designer, just code to define your model. The second was the DB Context API, which was a slimmer version of Entity Framework's object context. DB Context sat on top of the object context and was therefore still very dependent on the core API. The benefit of the DB Context was that developers could work with a smarter, more focused context. The next version of EF, EF5, brought changes to the core API inside of .NET. The most significant enhancements were a more efficient and faster query cache and support for some highly requested features like enums and spatial data. After EF5 was released, the team completely open-sourced future development of Entity Framework. EF6 was developed openly on CodePlex, and rather than having part of Entity Framework inside of the .NET framework and another part on NuGet, they pulled all of the EF APIs into a single assembly that could be downloaded from NuGet. This allowed the team to release updates to EF6 as needed without waiting for the next version of .NET. There were a lot of great changes in EF6. You can watch my EF6 Ninja Edition What's New in EF course to learn more about that. All along, from the first version to EF6, whether it was inside of .NET or distributed as a NuGet package, Entity Framework has relied on the full .NET framework. You can only use it in applications or services that are hosted on machines with a full .NET framework installed. On the client side, that meant using it in console apps, WPF or Windows Forms applications, and on the server side, it meant ASP.NET apps or APIs or services. Entity Framework 7 will remove that dependency on the full .NET framework, which frees it up to be used in variations of the .NET framework, such as the Windows Phone operating system or Windows Store apps. It'll also be available to systems running Mono, which means you can use Entity Framework in applications on Linux or Macintosh systems. The upcoming version of ASP.NET, which is ASP.NET 5, is a lightweight composable API that will be delivered in bits and pieces by NuGet. EF7 is going that same route, so it will also work with this version of ASP.NET. At the same time, EF7 will continue to work with the full .NET Framework apps we've always targeted, from console apps to web APIs.